The classified training room fell silent as Maya Chen's fingers froze above her keyboard. Around her, 23 elite military cyber specialists stared at their screens in disbelief. The Pentagon's most secure firewall, the one that had never been breached, the digital fortress that protected America's deepest secrets, had just been penetrated, in 90 seconds, by a woman they had dismissed as a glorified code monkey just hours before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Colonel Harrison's face drained of color as he watched the breach unfold on the main display. The same woman he had publicly humiliated, stripped of her security clearance, and banned from the exercise was now sitting in the corner of the room, with a borrowed laptop, systematically dismantling their most sophisticated cyber defenses, while his handpicked team of cyber warriors watched in stunned silence. The morning mist clung to the windows of the Cyber Operations Center like digital static, obscuring the view of the Virginia countryside beyond. Maya Chen arrived at the facility 2 hours before the official start time, as she had every day. For the past 3 years, her access badge, worn on a simple lanyard around her neck, bore no military rank or special designation. Just her name, her clearance level, and the word Contractor in small gray letters. She preferred the early hours, when the corridors echoed with nothing but the hum of cooling systems and the distant whir of server farms. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, designed to blend into the suburban office parks that dotted the landscape. But beneath its mundane exterior lay some of the most sophisticated cyber warfare equipment on the planet. Maya's workstation occupied a corner of the 3rd floor, tucked away from the main operations floor where uniformed personnel monitored global network traffic and analyzed emerging threats. Her desk was sparse, organized with the precision of someone who understood that efficiency came from eliminating distractions. 2 monitors, a mechanical keyboard that clicked with satisfying precision, and a coffee mug that had seen better days. No photographs, no personal items, nothing that would suggest this space belonged to anyone in particular. The irony was not lost on her. In a world where digital presence could span continents in milliseconds, where identity could be crafted and discarded with a few keystrokes, Maya Chen remained deliberately invisible. She wrote code that protected national infrastructure, identified vulnerabilities in systems that safeguarded millions of lives, and traced digital fingerprints left by foreign adversaries. Yet to most people in the building, she was simply the quiet woman who fixed things when they broke. Her background was unconventional for someone in her position. No military academy, no computer science degree from a prestigious university. Maya had learned programming the hard way, through necessity and obsession. Growing up in a household where money was scarce, she had discovered that broken computers could be bought cheaply and coaxed back to life with patience and ingenuity. What began as a way to save money on homework assignments had evolved into an intuitive understanding of how digital systems thought, how they made decisions, and more importantly, how they could be persuaded to make different ones. Her first job out of community college had been with a small cybersecurity firm that specialized in penetration testing. Companies would hire them to attack their own systems, probing for weaknesses before real adversaries could find them. Maya had excelled at this work, not because she was malicious, but because she approached each system like a puzzle. She could see patterns where others saw chaos, find connections that existed in the spaces between the obvious. The government had recruited her 5 years ago, not through official channels, but through word of mouth. Someone who knew someone had heard about the contractor who could break into anything. The offer had come with impressive benefits, top secret clearance, and the promise that her work would matter on a national scale. What they hadn't mentioned was that her civilian status would make her perpetually suspect in a culture built on rank and hierarchy. Maya understood her place in the ecosystem. She was brought in to think like an adversary, to find flaws in systems designed by people who followed rules and procedures. The military personnel she worked alongside were brilliant, disciplined, and constrained by protocols that ensured consistency and reliability. She was none of those things. Her value lay in unpredictability, in approaching problems from angles that regulation and doctrine would never consider. This morning, like every morning, she began her work by scanning the overnight logs. Network intrusion attempts, automated probes, the digital equivalent of someone rattling door handles to see what might be unlocked. Most of it was noise, routine harassment from script kiddies, and opportunistic criminals. But buried within the chaos, Maya had learned to recognize signatures that suggested more sophisticated operators. She found one almost immediately. A series of connection attempts against a Department of Energy server, each probe lasting exactly 17 seconds before disconnecting. The timing was too precise to be random, too consistent to be automated. Someone was testing response times, mapping the network topology one careful step at a time. Maya flagged the incident and began tracing the source. The trail led through a maze of proxy servers and virtual private networks, each layer designed to obscure the true origin of the attack. Most analysts would have given up after the first few redirections, marking the incident as untraceable and moving on to the next alert. Maya kept digging. She had developed her own tools over the years, scripts and algorithms that could peer through obfuscation techniques and identify patterns that suggested human decision-making behind the automation. 3 hours later, she had her answer. The probes were originating from a server farm in Eastern Europe, funded through a series of shell companies that ultimately traced back to a state-sponsored hacking group known as Shadow Collective. They were good, better than most, but they had made one mistake. The 17-second intervals weren't random. They were based on a mathematical sequence that appeared in academic papers published by a computer science professor at Moscow Technical Institute. Maya documented her findings in a detailed report, complete with network traces, behavioral analysis, and recommendations for countermeasures. She submitted it through the proper channels and returned to monitoring her assigned sectors. By the time her official workday began, she had already identified and neutralized a threat that could have compromised critical infrastructure. The irony was that her most important work happened in these quiet hours, before the briefings and meetings and bureaucratic machinery kicked into gear. Once the building filled with personnel, Maya became just another contractor, valuable for routine maintenance but excluded from the discussions where real decisions were made. Colonel David Harrison arrived at precisely 8:30, as he had every day since taking command of the Cyber Operations Center 18 months ago. He was everything Maya was not: tall, imposing, decorated with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished military career. He commanded respect through presence alone, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Without question, Harrison had built his reputation through conventional military excellence: infantry combat, strategic planning, leadership under pressure. His transfer to cyber operations was part of the military's evolution, placing experienced officers in positions to oversee a domain that was becoming increasingly critical to national security. What he lacked in technical expertise, he compensated for with disciplined management and unwavering confidence in the chain of command. Maya watched him conduct the morning briefing from her workstation, his words carrying clearly across the open floor plan. He reviewed overnight incidents, assigned priorities for the day, and outlined preparations for the upcoming exercise. Operation Digital Fortress was to be the largest cyber warfare simulation in military history, bringing together specialists from every branch of the armed forces to test offensive protocols against simulated nation-state attacks. The exercise would span 5 days, with increasingly sophisticated scenarios designed to push participants to their limits. Red teams would attempt to breach critical systems while blue teams defended against their attacks. Points would be awarded for successful penetrations, successful defenses, and innovative techniques. The results would determine funding allocations, influence strategic planning, and identify the next generation of cyber warfare leaders. Maya had been excluded from meaningful participation in Digital Fortress. Her role was relegated to technical support, monitoring system stability, and troubleshooting connectivity issues. She was essential for keeping the exercise running, but irrelevant to its outcomes. The message was clear. Contractors could maintain the infrastructure, but only uniformed personnel could be trusted with operational responsibilities. She didn't protest the decision. Experience had taught her that challenging such assignments was counterproductive and career-limiting. Instead, she focused on her assigned duties while privately analyzing the exercise design. The scenarios were sophisticated, but they followed predictable patterns. The Red Team attacks would probe standard vulnerabilities using known techniques. The Blue Team defenses would rely on established protocols and commercial security tools. Maya could see the flaws immediately. Real adversaries didn't follow exercise protocols. They didn't announce their intentions or limit themselves to approved attack vectors. They were creative, patient, and willing to exploit human psychology as readily as technical vulnerabilities. The exercise was valuable for testing coordination and communication under pressure, but it bore little resemblance to actual cyber warfare. She documented her observations in a separate file, not intended for official submission, but for her own understanding. Maya had learned to think in layers, to see not just what was happening, but why it was happening and what might happen. Next, the exercise would unfold according to its predetermined script. Participants would learn valuable lessons about teamwork and protocol, and everyone would congratulate themselves on a successful simulation. But the real lessons, the ones that might matter when facing actual adversaries, would remain unlearned. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the morning progressed, participants began arriving for Digital Fortress. They came from military bases across the country, each representing the cream of their respective cyber programs. Maya recognized some faces from previous exercises and conferences, but most were new to her. They carried themselves with the confidence of proven professionals, accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Major Sarah Kellerman was among the arrivals, a rising star in Air Force cyber operations with a reputation for innovative defensive strategies. Captain Marcus Thompson represented Army Cyber Command, his expertise in network forensics earning him recognition throughout the intelligence community. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Price brought Navy experience in submarine-based cyber operations, a specialized field that few truly understood. Maya watched them assemble with a mixture of respect and frustration. These were genuinely talented individuals, each possessing skills and knowledge that she valued. But they were also products of a system that prioritized credentials over capability, that valued conformity over creativity. They would approach the exercise with the same methodical precision that had earned them their positions following established procedures and best practices. The irony was that Maya could probably outperform most of them given the opportunity. Not because she was inherently smarter, but because her outsider status had forced her to develop different skills. She couldn't rely on rank or procedure, so she had learned to think laterally, to find solutions that weren't in any manual or training program. But opportunity was exactly what she lacked. Her contractor status meant she would spend the exercise ensuring that network connections remained stable and servers stayed online, while others tested their skills against simulated adversaries. She would watch from the periphery as participants earned recognition and advancement opportunities that were close to civilians. Maya returned her attention to her monitoring duties as the exercise participants filed into the secure briefing room. Through the glass walls, She could see Colonel Harrison outlining the exercise parameters, his gestures confident and commanding. The participants listened intently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. This was their moment, their chance to prove themselves against the best and brightest. She noticed something else as well. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the exercise director, kept glancing in her direction. Vasquez was a civilian like Maya, but her Ph.D. in computer science from Stanford and her published research in advanced cryptography had earned her a level of respect that contractor status alone could never provide. She understood both the technical and political aspects of cyber operations, making her uniquely qualified to design realistic scenarios. Maya wondered if Vasquez had read her reports on the Shadow collective intrusion or her analysis of the emerging attack vectors. It was possible that someone in the chain of command actually paid attention to contractor input, even if they didn't acknowledge it publicly. The thought was both encouraging and frustrating. Her work might influence important decisions while she remained invisible to the decision-makers themselves. The morning briefings concluded, and participants dispersed to their assigned workstations. The exercise wouldn't begin until tomorrow, but today would be devoted to system familiarization and team building. Maya watched them settle into their temporary workspace, noting how quickly hierarchies established themselves. Military personnel naturally deferred to those with higher ranks, while civilians positioned themselves based on reputation and expertise. She was not invited to participate in these informal networks. Her workstation remained isolated in its corner, her role clearly defined as support rather than participant. Maya had grown accustomed to this separation, but it still stung to be excluded from conversations that touched on her areas of expertise. As the day progressed, she continued monitoring network traffic while keeping one ear tuned to the conversations around her. The participants discussed strategy, shared war stories from previous exercises, and speculated about the scenarios they might face. Their enthusiasm was infectious, even from a distance. These were people who genuinely cared about their work, who understood that cybersecurity was not just an abstract, technical challenge but a critical component of national defense. Maya found herself wondering what it would be like to be truly part of such a team, to have her insights valued and her contributions recognized. She had spent years proving herself through the quality of her work, but recognition remained elusive. Perhaps it always would. The military culture that produced such competent professionals also created barriers that kept outsiders permanently outside. The afternoon brought technical rehearsals as participants tested their access to exercise systems and verified communication protocols. Maya's role became more visible during this phase as she troubleshot connectivity issues and optimized network performance. She moved between workstations with quiet efficiency, identifying problems before they became critical and implementing solutions with minimal disruption. It was during one of these troubleshooting sessions that she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Major Kellerman was discussing defensive strategies with Captain Thompson, their voices carrying across the room as they debated the merits of different intrusion detection systems. "The key is layered defense," Kellerman was saying. "Multiple, redundant systems that can compensate for individual failures." Thompson nodded agreement. "That's doctrine, but doctrine assumes rational adversaries who follow predictable attack patterns. What happens when someone ignores the rules entirely?" "There are no rules in cyber warfare," Kellerman replied. "That's what makes it so challenging." Maya paused in her work, struck by the irony of the statement. There were indeed no rules for adversaries, but there were countless rules for defenders. Protocols, procedures, regulations, and guidelines that constrained their responses and limited their options. The very structure that gave military cyber operations their strength also created predictable vulnerabilities. She was tempted to join the conversation, to share her perspective on asymmetric thinking and unconventional attack vectors. But she knew such input would not be welcomed. Her role was to ensure their computers worked, not to contribute to strategic discussions. Maya returned to her workstation as the afternoon wound down. Tomorrow would bring the actual exercise, 5 days of intensive simulation that would test everyone's skills and endurance. She would spend those days in the background, making sure the technology functioned properly while others earned glory and recognition. But as she prepared to leave for the evening, Maya made a decision that would surprise everyone, including herself. She began downloading a copy of the exercise network architecture, studying the defensive systems that would be tested over the coming days. If she couldn't participate officially, she could at least understand what the participants would face. What she found disturbed her more than she expected. The defensive systems were impressive by conventional standards, incorporating the latest commercial security tools and military-grade encryption. But they were also predictable, following design patterns that any sophisticated adversary would recognize and counter. The exercise would test the participants' ability to use these tools effectively, but it wouldn't prepare them for opponents who approached cyber warfare as an art rather than a science. Maya spent the evening analyzing the network architecture. From her home computer, mapping out potential attack vectors and identifying vulnerabilities that the exercise designers had overlooked. Not because she intended to interfere with the simulation, but because she needed to understand the gap between what the exercise would teach and what real cyber warfare demanded. By midnight, she had identified 17 different ways to compromise the defensive systems, some requiring sophisticated technical knowledge, but others relying on simple human psychology. The participants would face challenging but fair scenarios that tested their training and preparation. They wouldn't encounter the kind of unpredictable, ruthless creativity that characterized actual state-sponsored attacks. Maya closed her laptop and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring 5 days of watching from the sidelines. While others played the game she understood better than most. She had made peace with her role years ago, accepting that recognition mattered less than the quality of the work itself. But some small part of her wondered what would happen if she were given the chance to demonstrate what unconventional thinking could accomplish. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow would provide exactly such an opportunity, though not in any way she could have anticipated. The exercise that was designed to test the limits of conventional cyber warfare was about to encounter something entirely different, a contractor with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The first day of Digital Fortress began at dawn with the kind of military precision that left no room for ambiguity. Maya arrived to find the Cyber Operations Center transformed into a war room, with additional monitors displaying real-time network status and tactical summaries. The exercise participants had traded their casual clothes for military utilities, creating a visual distinction between the official players and the support personnel who would keep the game running. Colonel Harrison conducted the opening briefing with characteristic authority, outlining the rules of engagement and establishing the command structure that would govern the exercise. Red teams would launch attacks beginning at 0800 hours with blue teams required to detect, analyze, and neutralize each threat within specified time limits. Points would be awarded based on speed, effectiveness, and innovation. Maya listened from her corner workstation, noting the emphasis on innovation while recognizing the constraints that would limit any truly innovative approaches. Military exercises required controlled variables and measurable outcomes. Genuine innovation, by definition, was unpredictable and difficult to quantify. The participants would be encouraged to think creatively within predetermined boundaries. The exercise began with conventional probing attacks, red teams testing blue team responsiveness with standard reconnaissance techniques. Maya monitored network performance while keeping one eye on the tactical displays. The blue teams responded competently, identifying threats and implementing countermeasures according to established protocols. Their training was evident in the coordination and communication that characterized their defensive efforts. But Maya could see what the participants couldn't. The Red Team attacks were following predictable patterns, escalating in complexity, according to a schedule that allowed Blue Teams to adapt and learn. Real adversaries wouldn't be so considerate. They would strike without warning using techniques that exploited not just technical vulnerabilities, but human psychology and organizational assumptions. As the morning progressed, Maya began noticing anomalies in the network traffic that weren't part of the official exercise. Subtle probes against systems that weren't included in the simulation. Connection attempts that followed patterns she recognized from her analysis of the Shadow Collective intrusion. Someone was using the exercise as cover for reconnaissance against the facility's actual operational networks. She documented the intrusion attempts while debating whether to report them immediately. The exercise protocols discouraged interruptions unless system stability was threatened, and these probes weren't affecting the simulation's functionality. But they represented a genuine security threat, the kind of patient, methodical reconnaissance that preceded serious attacks. Maya decided to investigate further before raising alarms. She began tracing the anomalous traffic using her own tools to peer through the layers of obfuscation that concealed the true source. What she found confirmed her suspicions. The probes were sophisticated, patient, and definitely not part of the exercise. Someone was using Digital Fortress as an opportunity to gather intelligence about American cyber defensive capabilities. By midday, she had mapped the intrusion network and identified its probable objectives. The attackers weren't trying to disrupt the exercise, they were studying it, analyzing response times, cataloging defensive tools, identifying personnel, and their specializations. It was exactly the kind of intelligence gathering that would precede a major cyber attack against critical infrastructure. Maya prepared a detailed report documenting her findings and submitted it through proper channels. Then she waited for a response that never came. The exercise continued according to schedule. Participants focused on their assigned scenarios, while real adversaries collected intelligence about their capabilities and procedures. Frustration began building as the afternoon wore on without acknowledgement of her report. Maya understood that chain of command had its purposes, but those purposes didn't include responding quickly to threats that fell outside predetermined categories. Her civilian status meant her reports went to civilian supervisors who lacked authority to interrupt military exercises. The delay built into the system was creating a window of opportunity for hostile intelligence gathering. She tried contacting Dr. Vasquez directly, but was told the exercise director was unavailable except for critical system failures. The irony was better. A contractor who identified genuine threats to national security couldn't get the attention of decision-makers who were busy managing a simulation. Maya made another decision that would have consequences she couldn't anticipate. She began actively tracking the hostile reconnaissance, not just documenting it but interfering with it. Using her administrative access to the exercise networks, she began introducing subtle delays and errors into the data the intruders were collecting. Not enough to alert them to her interference, but sufficient to degrade the value of their intelligence gathering. It was during this counter-reconnaissance effort that Maya made a discovery that changed her understanding of the entire situation. The hostile probes weren't just studying the exercise, they were preparing for something much more ambitious. Buried within the network traffic were reconnaissance scans against Pentagon systems, methodical mapping of the same networks that protected America's most sensitive military secrets. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Shadow Collective wasn't just gathering intelligence about cyber defensive capabilities, they were preparing to attack the Pentagon itself. The exercise was providing perfect cover for reconnaissance that would enable them to strike at the heart of American military command and control. Maya's hands shook as she compiled evidence of the Pentagon reconnaissance. This wasn't a routine intrusion that could wait for proper channels and bureaucratic review. This was preparation for an attack that could compromise national security at the highest levels. She needed to alert someone immediately, but her position in the organizational hierarchy meant her warnings would disappear into layers of review and approval. She tried reaching Colonel Harrison directly, but was blocked by his aide, who explained that the colonel couldn't be disturbed during exercise operations, except for facility emergencies. Maya's report of hostile reconnaissance didn't qualify as a facility emergency under current protocols. Desperation drove her to attempt contact with Major Kellerman, who she had observed demonstrating both technical competence and strategic thinking. But Kellerman was deep in the exercise scenario, leading her blue team through a complex defensive operation that demanded her complete attention. Maya's attempt to interrupt was rebuffed by exercise monitors who enforced strict communication protocols. She found herself in an impossible position, armed with knowledge of a potentially catastrophic security threat, but unable to communicate that knowledge to anyone with authority to act upon it. The system that was supposed to protect national security was preventing her from protecting national security. Maya stared at her monitors displaying the ongoing Pentagon reconnaissance, watching hostile intelligence gathering proceed with methodical precision while she remained powerless to intervene. The Shadow Collective was patient, professional, and apparently confident that their activities would remain undetected until it was too late to matter. But they had made one mistake. They had underestimated the contractor in the corner, the quiet woman whose warnings had been dismissed and whose capabilities had been overlooked. Maya Chen might not have rank or official authority, but she had something more valuable in this situation. She had the technical skills to stop them and the desperate motivation of someone with nothing left to lose. The decision that would define the rest of her career came in that moment of crystalline clarity. If she couldn't warn the people in charge, she would have to stop the threat herself. Maya began preparing for something she had never attempted before, a real-time cyber warfare operation against a sophisticated state-sponsored adversary. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Everything she had learned about unconventional tactics, everything she understood about exploiting system vulnerabilities, everything that made her different from the military specialists around her was about to be tested under conditions where failure could have national security implications. Maya took a deep breath and began typing commands that would turn her from passive observer to active defender. The Shadow Collective was about to discover that their careful reconnaissance had been observed by someone who played the game by different rules entirely. Maya's fingers moved across her keyboard with surgical precision, each keystroke calculated and deliberate. The room around her buzzed with the controlled chaos of Digital Fortress, participants immersed in their simulated battles while she fought a very real war that none of them could see. Her screens displayed cascading lines of code and network traffic that told a story of patience, planning, and imminent danger. The Shadow Collective had been working for weeks, possibly months, to position themselves for this moment. Their reconnaissance wasn't random exploration, but systematic intelligence gathering with clear objectives. Maya traced their digital footprints through layers of obfuscation, recognizing the hallmarks of state-sponsored cyber operations. These weren't script kiddies or opportunistic criminals. These were professionals with unlimited resources and the backing of a hostile nation. She had identified their primary objective within an hour of beginning her counter-surveillance. The Pentagon's Joint Chiefs Communication Network, the secure channels through which America's highest military leaders coordinated global operations. Compromising those communications wouldn't just provide intelligence, it would give hostile actors the ability to influence or disrupt American military responses during international crises. The elegance of their approach was breathtaking in its simplicity. Digital Fortress provided perfect cover for their reconnaissance. Network administrators would attribute unusual traffic to exercise activities. Security monitors would focus on simulated threats while ignoring real ones. And by the time anyone noticed the intrusion, the Shadow Collective would have achieved their objectives and vanished into the digital ether. Maya understood why her warnings had been ignored. The exercise protocols created a bubble of artificial reality where only predetermined scenarios mattered. Real threats that didn't fit the script were invisible to participants focused on winning points and demonstrating competence within the simulation's boundaries. She was probably the only person in the building who was watching the actual networks, rather than the exercise displays. Her initial attempts at passive interference had been successful but limited. She could degrade the quality of intelligence the intruders collected, but she couldn't stop their reconnaissance entirely without revealing her awareness of their presence. The moment they realized they had been detected, they would either accelerate their timeline or abort the operation entirely. Neither outcome served American interests. Maya needed a different approach, something that would neutralize the threat without alerting the attackers to her interference. She began studying their operational patterns, looking for vulnerabilities in their methodology that she could exploit. The Shadow Collective was professional, but professionalism created predictability. If she could understand their procedures well enough, she might be able to manipulate them. The breakthrough came when she analyzed their command and control infrastructure. The attackers were using a sophisticated botnet to distribute their operations across thousands of compromised computers worldwide. Each individual probe appeared to originate from a different source, making traditional countermeasures ineffective. But the botnet required coordination, and coordination required communication. Maya began mapping the botnet's communication protocols, searching for the hidden channels through which the Shadow Collective coordinated their distributed operations. It was tedious work, requiring her to analyze thousands of seemingly unrelated network connections to identify patterns that suggested centralized control. But patience was one skill her unconventional background had taught her well. While she worked, the exercise continued around her with clockwork precision. Red teams launched increasingly sophisticated attacks while blue teams refined their defensive responses. Scores were tallied, lessons learned, and tactical innovations recognized. Colonel Harrison moved between workstations with visible satisfaction, pleased with the professionalism displayed by participants. Maya envied their focus. The exercise participants could concentrate entirely on the challenges in front of them, secure in the knowledge that their superiors would handle larger strategic concerns. She had no such luxury. The weight of national security implications pressed down on her like a physical burden, made worse by the knowledge that she was fighting this battle entirely alone. Her analysis of the botnet communications revealed something unexpected. The Shadow Collective wasn't just preparing to attack Pentagon networks. They were coordinating with other groups for simultaneous operations against multiple targets. Financial networks, power grid controllers, telecommunications infrastructure, and military communications would all be hit at the same time, creating a cascade of failures that would cripple American response capabilities. The scope of the planned attack was staggering. Not just cyber warfare, but cyber terrorism on a scale that could paralyze the entire country. Maya stared at her screens with growing horror as she realized the true magnitude of what she had uncovered. This wasn't just about stealing military secrets. It was about demonstrating that American technological superiority was an illusion. She made another attempt to contact Dr. Vasquez, using her administrative access to send an urgent message directly to the exercise director's personal account. The response came back within minutes, an automated reply explaining that all non-critical communications were being deferred until exercise completion. Maya's evidence of a coordinated cyber attack against national infrastructure apparently didn't qualify as critical. Frustration boiled over into something approaching panic. Maya had spent her career believing that competent work would eventually be recognized, that dedication and expertise would overcome institutional barriers. But she was discovering that those barriers could be impermeable when they mattered most. The system that employed her was preventing her from protecting it. She forced herself to focus on what she could control rather than what she couldn't. Maya began developing a more aggressive counter-operation, one that would disrupt the Shadow Collective's coordination without revealing her involvement. If she couldn't get permission to act, she would act without permission and deal with the consequences later. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to block the attackers' communications, she would hijack them. By inserting herself into their command and control network, she could feed false information to distributed botnet nodes while gathering intelligence about their true objectives and capabilities. It was dangerous, technically challenging, and completely unauthorized, but it might be the only way to prevent a catastrophic attack. Maya began by creating a digital persona that could blend into the Shadow Collective's operations. She needed credentials that would pass their security checks, network signatures that matched their operational patterns, and communication protocols that wouldn't trigger their intrusion detection systems. It required her to think like a hostile actor while maintaining her defensive objectives. The work was exhausting, demanding complete concentration while exercise activities continued around her. Maya was dimly aware of voices discussing tactical scenarios, monitors displaying attack and defense statistics, and the controlled excitement that characterized successful military simulations. But her attention remained focused on the invisible war being fought in data streams and communication protocols. Her first penetration of the botnet occurred just after lunch, when exercise participants were taking a brief break to review morning lessons. Maya's digital persona successfully authenticated with one of the command nodes, gaining access to operational communications that revealed the full scope of the planned attack. What she discovered exceeded her worst fears. The Shadow Collective wasn't working alone. They were part of a larger coalition that included criminal organizations, terrorist groups, and at least 3 nation-state actors. The cyber attack on American infrastructure was intended to provide cover for kinetic operations, physical attacks that would be launched while defenders were overwhelmed by digital chaos. It was hybrid warfare on a scale that military planners had theorized but never actually prepared for. Maya realized she was looking at plans for an act of war disguised as criminal activity. The attackers would strike civilian infrastructure to create confusion and panic while launching precision attacks against military command and control systems. By the time American forces could respond effectively, critical decisions would already have been made by leaders operating with compromised information. The timeline was equally disturbing. The attack was scheduled to begin in less than 6 hours, timed to coincide with a routine military exercise that would provide perfect cover for the initial phases. Maya understood with crystalline clarity that she was probably the only person who could prevent it, and she had neither the authority nor the institutional support necessary to act through official channels. She made the hardest decision of her professional life. Maya began actively sabotaging the Shadow Collective's operations, using her access to their command network to corrupt coordination protocols and misdirect operational communications. It was cyber warfare in its purest form. One analyst against an entire state-sponsored organization, fought with nothing but technical skill and desperate determination. Her first attacks were subtle, designed to create confusion without triggering security responses. She introduced delays into timing signals, corrupted targeting data, and misdirected communication packets to wrong destinations. The distributed nature of the botnet made it difficult for the attackers to recognize that their operations were being systematically degraded by external interference. But Maya knew her window of opportunity was limited. Eventually, the Shadow Collective would realize their communications were compromised and would either accelerate their timeline or switch to backup systems. She needed to do more than just delay the attack. She needed to prevent it entirely. The solution came to her with the same clarity that had characterized all her best technical insights. Instead of fighting the Shadow Collective directly, she would turn their own infrastructure against them. By corrupting their command protocols, she could cause their botnet to attack their own systems rather than American targets. It would require precise timing and flawless execution, but it was theoretically possible. Maya began preparing the digital equivalent of a logic bomb, a piece of code that would spread through the Shadow Collective's network and reverse their targeting parameters at the moment of attack. Their own weapons would become defensive systems. Their botnet would become a shield rather than a sword. But implementing such a plan required her to penetrate deeper into their infrastructure than any defensive operation had ever attempted. The risk was enormous. If her infiltration was detected, the attackers would immediately shift to backup systems while identifying her as a threat to be eliminated. Maya had no illusions about what happened to people who interfered with state-sponsored cyber operations. Her civilian status wouldn't protect her from retaliation that could take any form from character assassination to physical elimination. But the alternative was watching American infrastructure burn while she sat powerless to prevent it. Maya had devoted her career to protecting systems and the people who depended on them. She couldn't abandon that mission now, regardless of personal consequences. She began the deepest penetration of her career, moving through layers of security that protected the Shadow Collective's core infrastructure. Each barrier she overcame brought her closer to the heart of their operation, but also deeper into territory where discovery would mean certain exposure. Maya felt like she was walking through a minefield while defusing a bomb, knowing that a single mistake would be catastrophic. The technical challenges were unlike anything she had faced before. The Shadow Collective's security measures were sophisticated, layered, and paranoid. They assumed their networks would be attacked and had prepared accordingly. Maya had to think several moves ahead, anticipating their countermeasures while concealing her own activities. It was chess played at the speed of light with the stakes of nations. Her breakthrough came when she identified a design flaw in their operational security. The Shadow Collective had prioritized protecting their systems from external attack, but they had made assumptions about internal communications that Maya could exploit. By masquerading as one of their own command nodes, she could access systems that were invisible to outside observers. The irony was that her success depended on thinking like the adversaries she was fighting. Maya had to abandon the defensive mindset that had shaped her career and embrace the ruthless creativity that characterized effective cyber attacks. She was becoming what she had spent years protecting against, but for all the right reasons. As afternoon wore on, Maya felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her. She was fighting a war that no one else could see, making decisions that could affect millions of lives, operating without backup or support in hostile digital territory. The exercise participants around her remained focused on their simulations, unaware that real warfare was being conducted at the workstation in the corner. Colonel Harrison passed her desk during one of his routine inspections, pausing to glance at her monitors. Maya forced herself to appear calm while her screens displayed code that would have been incomprehensible to most observers. Harrison nodded approvingly at what appeared to be routine network maintenance before moving on to check exercise progress. The moment crystallized everything Maya understood about her position in the military hierarchy. She was invisible even when conducting operations that could determine the outcome of a war. Her technical expertise was valued when it supported official objectives, but her strategic insights were irrelevant to decision-makers who couldn't see beyond their immediate responsibilities. Maya returned her attention to the Shadow Collective's networks as evening approached. She had successfully penetrated their core infrastructure and was preparing to deploy her logic bomb when she discovered something that changed her understanding of the entire operation. The cyber attack wasn't just preparation for kinetic operations. It was preparation for something much worse. Hidden within the Shadow Collective's targeting data were references to nuclear command and control systems. The attackers weren't just planning to disrupt American infrastructure. They were planning to interfere with nuclear weapons security protocols. Maya stared at her screen in horror as she realized the true scope of their ambitions. A successful attack on nuclear command systems wouldn't just compromise national security. It could trigger accidental war. If military leaders couldn't trust their communications or control systems, they might make decisions based on incomplete or corrupted information. The margin for error in nuclear operations was essentially zero, and the Shadow Collective was planning to eliminate that margin entirely. Maya's hands trembled as she comprehended the full magnitude of what she had uncovered. This wasn't just cyber warfare. It was an attempt to destabilize the entire global security architecture. The attackers were gambling that they could create enough chaos to reshape international power relationships while avoiding direct responsibility for the consequences. She realized that her logic bomb plan was no longer sufficient. Simply disrupting the Shadow Collective's botnet wouldn't prevent them from switching to backup systems and proceeding with modified plans. Maya needed to do something more dramatic, something that would expose their operations while protecting American systems from attack. The idea that formed in her mind was so audacious that she initially dismissed it as impossible. But as she considered the technical requirements and operational constraints, Maya began to believe it might actually work. Instead of fighting the Shadow Collective, she would expose them to their own governments. By documenting their operations and broadcasting the evidence through channels that couldn't be ignored, she could force diplomatic intervention that would prevent the attack. But implementing such a plan would require her to penetrate systems she had never attempted to access, gather evidence under hostile surveillance, and distribute that evidence through channels that would ensure maximum visibility. Maya would have to become a whistleblower on an international scale, exposing state-sponsored terrorism while providing proof that couldn't be dismissed or discredited. The personal costs would be enormous. Her career would be over, her security clearance would be revoked, and she would face legal consequences that could include treason charges. But the alternative was allowing an attack that could lead to nuclear war through miscommunication and system corruption. Maya made her choice with the same quiet determination that had characterized her entire career. She began gathering evidence of the Shadow Collective's operations, documenting their infrastructure, cataloging their objectives, and preparing a comprehensive dossier that would expose their plans to international scrutiny. It was the most important work of her life, and she was doing it entirely alone. As night fell over the Cyber Operations Center, exercise participants prepared for evening scenarios while Maya prepared for something that would change the course of international relations. The quiet contractor in the corner was about to demonstrate that individual technical competence could influence global events, but only at enormous personal cost. The digital battlefield was about to expand beyond anything the exercise designers had imagined, with stakes that made simulated warfare seem trivial by comparison. Chen was preparing to fight the most important battle of the cyber age, armed with nothing but technical skill and moral conviction against adversaries with unlimited resources and state backing. The outcome would determine not just the success of a terrorist attack, but the future of cyber warfare itself. In a few hours, the world would discover what happened when unconventional thinking met existential stakes in the depths of cyberspace. Maya's war was about to become everyone's war, whether they realized it or not. The clock on Maya's monitor read 23:47 when she initiated the most dangerous operation of her career. Around her, the Cyber Operations Center had settled into the quiet rhythm of night watch, with skeleton crews monitoring exercise systems. While most participants caught a few hours of sleep before tomorrow's scenarios, Maya had not slept. She had spent the evening preparing for a digital assault that would either save American infrastructure or destroy her life completely. Her evidence dossier was complete, documenting every aspect of the Shadow Collective's planned attack with forensic precision. Network diagrams, communication intercepts, target lists, and coordination protocols painted a comprehensive picture of state-sponsored terrorism disguised as cybercrime. But evidence meant nothing without a platform to present it, and Maya had identified the most dramatic platform imaginable. She was going to hack the Pentagon, not to steal secrets or cause damage, but to broadcast her evidence through channels that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. By penetrating the same networks the Shadow Collective planned to attack, Maya would demonstrate their vulnerabilities while exposing the threat in a forum that would demand immediate attention from the highest levels of government. The irony was delicious. The exercise participants sleeping in their temporary quarters had spent the day practicing defensive cyber warfare against simulated threats. Maya was about to conduct offensive cyber warfare against real systems to prevent an actual attack. Her methods would be identical to those employed by hostile actors, but her objectives remained purely defensive. She began by studying the Pentagon's network architecture, not through official documentation, but through the same reconnaissance techniques the Shadow Collective had been using. Maya needed to understand their defenses from an attacker's perspective, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited without causing permanent damage to critical systems. The Pentagon's cybersecurity was formidable, reflecting decades of investment and refinement by the world's most capable information warfare specialists. Multiple layers of intrusion detection, behavioral analysis systems that could identify anomalous activities, and human monitors trained to recognize sophisticated attacks. Maya would have to evade all of these defenses while penetrating deep enough to access communication systems that could broadcast her evidence globally. Her approach drew inspiration from everything she had learned about unconventional warfare. Instead of attacking the Pentagon's defenses directly, Maya would exploit the same blind spots that made the Shadow Collective's reconnaissance possible. Military networks were designed to resist external attack, but they made assumptions about internal communications that could be manipulated by someone with sufficient technical skill and detailed knowledge. Maya's first penetration attempt began at midnight, timed to coincide with shift changes that created brief windows of reduced surveillance. She used techniques borrowed from the Shadow Collective's playbook, masquerading as legitimate system traffic while probing for entry points that wouldn't trigger automated defenses. The initial barriers fell more easily than she had expected. Pentagon security was designed to stop foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations, not civilian contractors with intimate knowledge of military network protocols. Maya's years of support in government systems had given her insights into defensive assumptions that external attackers couldn't possibly possess. But each successful penetration brought her deeper into territory where discovery would have catastrophic consequences. Maya was committing multiple felonies with every keystroke, violating laws designed to protect national security, even though her intentions were purely patriotic. The legal system wouldn't distinguish between her motives and those of hostile actors attempting identical attacks. She pushed deeper into the Pentagon's infrastructure, navigating through layers of security that protected increasingly sensitive systems. Maya felt like she was descending into the digital equivalent of a nuclear reactor, surrounded by protective barriers that existed for excellent reasons. One mistake would trigger responses that would expose her activities to every security agency in the government. The breakthrough came when she identified a vulnerability in the Pentagon's internal communication protocols. Military networks prioritized reliability over security for certain types of routine traffic, assuming that anyone with access to internal systems had already been authenticated and authorized. Maya could exploit that assumption to inject her evidence into communication streams that would be distributed automatically throughout the command structure. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to access classified systems directly, Maya would embed her evidence in routine administrative traffic that flowed through the same networks used by senior leadership. Budget reports, personnel updates, and maintenance notifications were processed by systems that had broad distribution capabilities but minimal security oversight. Maya began preparing her evidence package for injection into the Pentagon's communication infrastructure. She compressed years of analysis into a presentation that could be understood by military leaders without technical backgrounds, emphasizing the imminent threat to nuclear command systems, while providing detailed proof of the Shadow Collective's capabilities and intentions. The clock showed 2:15 when Maya initiated her final penetration sequence. She had identified the optimal injection point, crafted her evidence package to bypass content filters, and established multiple escape routes in case her activities were detected before completion. Everything she had learned about cyber warfare was focused on the next few minutes of operation. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision as she executed commands that would either save American infrastructure or end her career in disgrace. Maya felt strangely calm as she crossed the final barriers protecting Pentagon communications, as if the magnitude of what she was attempting had moved beyond normal emotional responses into something approaching Zen-like. Focus. The injection process began at 2:23, her evidence package flowing into Pentagon networks disguised as routine system maintenance reports. Maya watched data streams carry her analysis through layers of military bureaucracy, distributing copies to hundreds of recipients who would discover the threat intelligence when they checked their morning communications. There would be no way to suppress or ignore evidence that had been delivered through official channels to personnel throughout the command structure. She was preparing to extract from Pentagon systems when alarms began sounding throughout the Cyber Operations Center. Not exercise alarms, but real security alerts indicating hostile network activity. Maya's blood froze as she realized the Shadow Collective had detected her interference and accelerated their timeline. The coordinated attack on American infrastructure was beginning 4 hours ahead of schedule. Exercise participants erupted from their sleeping quarters in various states of dress and confusion, responding to emergency protocols that called for immediate defensive action during actual cyber attacks. Maya watched Colonel Harrison sprint toward the operations floor while she remained connected to Pentagon networks, her unauthorized access suddenly irrelevant compared to the crisis unfolding across multiple screens. The Shadow Collective's attack began with surgical precision, targeting communication nodes that would isolate military commanders from their subordinates while corrupting information flows that enabled coordinated responses. Maya recognized their techniques from her analysis of their infrastructure, but seeing them deployed against real systems created a visceral terror that no simulation could replicate. Power grid controllers began reporting anomalies as hostile code infiltrated supervisory systems that managed electrical distribution across the eastern seaboard. Financial networks experienced cascading failures as trading algorithms were corrupted by malicious inputs designed to trigger economic panic. Telecommunications infrastructure showed signs of systematic compromise, with routing protocols redirecting traffic through hostile monitoring stations. Maya realized she was witnessing the opening phases of cyber warfare on a scale that exceeded every scenario military planners had considered. The Shadow Collective wasn't just attacking individual systems. They were orchestrating a symphony of destruction, designed to overwhelm defensive capabilities while creating panic that would paralyze decision-making processes. But she also recognized something the exercise participants couldn't see. The attack was proceeding according to plans she had already penetrated and analyzed. Maya knew their objectives, their methods, and their timeline because she had spent hours studying their operational protocols. Her earlier infiltration of their networks had provided her with a roadmap of exactly what was happening and what would happen next. Colonel Harrison was shouting orders to personnel who were struggling to comprehend the scope of the crisis when Maya made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of extracting from Pentagon systems and hoping someone would notice her evidence, she would use her unauthorized access to coordinate defensive responses in real time. Maya's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "Colonel, the power grid attacks are targeting substations in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. They're using compromised maintenance protocols to override safety systems. The financial network intrusions are secondary, designed to create panic while they focus on telecommunications and military communications." Harrison spun toward her with an expression of confusion and growing anger. "Who authorized you to access operational intelligence? How do you know what they're targeting?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. "I've been tracking them for 18 hours. I know their infrastructure, their capabilities, and their objectives. I also know how to stop them, but only if you let me help instead of following protocols that were designed for conventional threats." The operations floor fell silent except for the steady stream of alerts indicating spreading system failures. Maya could see the calculation in Harrison's eyes as he weighed protocols against necessity, authority against competence. Around them, uniformed personnel waited for orders while American infrastructure burned in cyberspace. Dr. Vasquez appeared at Harrison's shoulder, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Colonel, we're receiving reports that someone has penetrated Pentagon networks and distributed detailed intelligence about this attack. The information appears to be authentic and comprehensive." Maya felt a moment of satisfaction as her evidence began circulating through official channels. But there was no time to savor vindication. The Shadow Collective's attack was accelerating, with new phases beginning before defensive responses could be organized. She needed to act immediately or watch helplessly as critical systems fell like dominoes. "I can stop them," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent operations floor. "But I need access to defensive systems and authorization to conduct active countermeasures. This isn't a simulation where we can restart if something goes wrong. This is cyber warfare, and we're losing." Harrison stared at her for a moment. That stretched like eternity before making the decision that would validate Maya's entire career. "Do it. Whatever you need, whatever authority you require, you have it. Just stop them." Maya's transformation from invisible contractor to operational commander was instantaneous. She moved to the central console with quiet confidence, her fingers dancing across interfaces designed for uniformed personnel, while exercise participants watched in fascination. Years of studying military networks from the outside had given her insights that insiders couldn't possess. Her counterattack began with the same precision that had characterized the hostile assault. Maya used her knowledge of the Shadow Collective's infrastructure to target their command and control systems, disrupting coordination between distributed attack nodes while protecting American systems from ongoing intrusions. It was defensive cyber warfare in its purest form, turning the attackers' own weapons against them. The first victory came within minutes as Maya successfully isolated the botnet nodes, attacking power grid controllers. By corrupting their command protocols, she forced the compromised systems to disconnect from their targets while remaining under hostile control. The Shadow Collective found themselves commanding an army that could no longer reach its objectives. But Maya's most dramatic success was yet to come. Using access credentials she had stolen during her earlier infiltration, she began broadcasting false orders through the Shadow Collective's command network. Instead of attacking American infrastructure, their distributed systems began attacking each other. Maya had turned their sophisticated coordination system into a weapon pointed at their own operations. The reversal was swift and complete. Within 30 minutes, the coordinated assault on American infrastructure had collapsed into chaos as attack systems turned against their controllers. The Shadow Collective's careful planning became their weakness as Maya used their own protocols to orchestrate their defeat. But her greatest achievement was preventing the attack on nuclear command systems. Maya had identified their penetration routes hours earlier and had prepared specific countermeasures that activated automatically when they attempted to access weapon control networks. The most dangerous aspect of their operation was neutralized before it could begin. The operations floor erupted in controlled celebration as defensive systems reported successful isolation of hostile intrusions across all major networks. Maya remained focused on her console, monitoring attack patterns to ensure no backup systems were activating, while documenting everything for post-incident analysis. It was only when Colonel Harrison placed his hand on her shoulder that Maya realized the immediate crisis had passed. She looked up to find the entire operations floor staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. The quiet contractor who had been excluded from meaningful participation in cyber warfare exercises had just conducted the most successful defensive operation in military history. Harrison's voice carried a respect that had been absent from every previous interaction. "How did you know? How did you see this coming when our entire intelligence apparatus missed it?" Maya's response was characteristically understated. "I was watching the actual networks instead of the exercise simulations. Real threats don't follow exercise protocols, and real solutions don't come from official channels. Sometimes you have to break rules to protect what the rules are supposed to defend." The aftermath unfolded with the kind of controlled chaos that characterized military responses to unexpected success. Maya's evidence dossier became the foundation for diplomatic protests that exposed state-sponsored terrorism while protecting intelligence sources and methods. The Shadow Collective's infrastructure was systematically dismantled through international cooperation that Maya's intelligence had made possible. But the most significant change was in Maya's status within the military cyber community. Her demonstration of unconventional thinking under extreme pressure had proven that defensive excellence sometimes required offensive capabilities. The rigid hierarchy that had excluded her from meaningful participation was forced to acknowledge that technical competence could emerge from unexpected sources. Maya found herself appointed to a newly created position that recognized her unique capabilities while providing official authorization for the methods she had been forced to employ without permission. Cyber warfare had evolved beyond conventional military structures, and Maya's success had demonstrated the need for approaches that transcended traditional boundaries. The irony was that her greatest professional triumph had come through actions that could have destroyed her career if they had failed. Maya had gambled everything on her ability to think like an adversary while maintaining defensive objectives, and her success had redefined what cyber warfare meant in an era where national security depended on individual technical excellence. Colonel Harrison requested a private meeting 3 days after the crisis, his demeanor reflecting a respect that Maya had never experienced from military leadership. They met in his office overlooking the facility where exercise participants continued their simulated battles, unaware that real warfare had been conducted in their midst. "I owe you an apology," Harrison said without preamble. "My assessment of your capabilities was based on assumptions that nearly resulted in catastrophic failure. Your unconventional background wasn't a limitation. It was exactly what we needed when conventional approaches proved inadequate." Maya's response reflected the quiet professionalism that had sustained her throughout years of institutional neglect. "Military protocols exist for important reasons, Colonel. They ensure consistency, reliability, and accountability under normal circumstances. But cyber warfare isn't normal circumstances, and adversaries who ignore protocols can only be defeated by defenders who are equally flexible." Harrison nodded slowly, his expression reflecting genuine understanding. "I've spent my career believing that hierarchy and discipline were the keys to military effectiveness. You've demonstrated that expertise can emerge from anywhere and that Technical competence matters more than organizational authority when national security is at stake. The conversation that followed redefined Maya's relationship with the military establishment. Instead of being tolerated as a necessary contractor, she was recognized as a strategic asset whose unconventional perspective provided capabilities that couldn't be replicated through conventional training or recruitment. Her civilian status became an advantage rather than a limitation. Maya's transformation from invisible contractor to cyber warfare pioneer was complete, but she remained fundamentally unchanged. She continued arriving early, working quietly, and focusing on technical excellence rather than institutional recognition. The difference was that her expertise was now valued appropriately, with authority that matched her capabilities and responsibility that reflected her strategic importance. The Cyber Operations Center was expanded to accommodate new approaches that blended military discipline with civilian innovation. Maya found herself leading teams that included both uniformed personnel and contractors, creating collaborative environments where technical competence determined influence rather than rank or status. It was the kind of organization she had always believed cyber warfare required. But Maya's greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her work had prevented not just a terrorist attack but a potential nuclear crisis. The Shadow Collective's assault on nuclear command systems could have triggered accidental war through miscommunication and system corruption. Her intervention had preserved the delicate balance that prevented conflicts from escalating beyond conventional boundaries. The exercise that had provided cover for hostile reconnaissance was eventually completed, with participants learning lessons that went far beyond simulated scenarios. Maya's demonstration of real-time cyber warfare had shown them what unconventional thinking could accomplish when institutional barriers were removed and technical excellence was properly supported. Dr. Vasquez approached Maya during the exercise closing ceremony, her expression reflecting professional admiration tinged with personal respect. "You've changed how we think about cyber warfare," she said quietly. "Not just the technical aspects, but the human elements that determine success or failure when everything else breaks down." Maya's response was characteristically modest. "I just applied problem-solving skills to a situation that required unconventional solutions. The technology was always capable of what we accomplished, but institutional assumptions prevented us from using it effectively. Sometimes you have to break things to fix them." The months that followed brought recognition that Maya had never sought but finally deserved. Congressional testimony about the importance of civilian expertise in military cyber operations, academic papers analyzing her tactical innovations, and invitations to speak at conferences where her insights influenced strategic planning at the highest levels. But Maya remained grounded in the technical work that had always defined her professional identity. She continued monitoring networks, analyzing threats, and developing countermeasures with the same quiet dedication that had characterized her career before recognition arrived. Success hadn't changed her fundamental commitment to protecting systems and the people who depended on them. The Shadow Collective incident became a case study in how individual technical competence could influence strategic outcomes when institutional barriers were overcome by necessity. Maya's success had demonstrated that cyber warfare required approaches that transcended conventional military structures, integrating diverse perspectives and unconventional methods. Chen had proven that expertise could emerge from unexpected sources and that defensive excellence sometimes required offensive capabilities. Her 90-second penetration of Pentagon networks had saved American infrastructure while redefining what cyber warfare meant in an era where national security depended on individual technical excellence rather than institutional authority. The quiet contractor who had been dismissed as insignificant had become the architect of defensive strategies that protected critical infrastructure from sophisticated adversaries. Maya's transformation from invisible support personnel to strategic leader reflected broader changes in how military organizations approached cyber warfare in an era where technical competence mattered more than traditional authority structures. Her story became inspiration for a new generation of cyber warriors who understood that protecting national security required more than following protocols and maintaining hierarchies. Maya had shown them that sometimes the most important battles were fought by individuals who were willing to risk everything to protect what mattered most, even when official channels failed and institutional support was absent. The woman who had been shoved out of conversations about cybersecurity had ultimately saved the conversations themselves by ensuring that the networks carrying them remained secure. Maya Chen's legacy was measured not in recognition or authority, but in the continued functioning of systems that most people never noticed but couldn't survive without. In the end, her greatest achievement was proving that technical excellence, moral conviction, and unconventional thinking could overcome any obstacle when national security was at stake. Maya had fought the most important cyber war in history and won it in 90 seconds, armed with nothing but competence, courage, and the determination to protect what others took for granted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.